Okay, Dennis, so we're sitting in your garden,
Yes.
a very beautiful garden,
Thank you.
alongside an exquisite piece of Dorset building next to us, that cottage. And we're talking to you because people have said that you're kind of the father of the Jurassic Coast World Heritage Site.
It's more like the grandfather at the moment.
So it's been a good opportunity to talk to you about how you got to that position and what's affected you in life to get there. So
Okay.
I guess the best thing to do is start at the very beginning.
I was born in Torquay,
Okay.
and I went to primary school and then Torquay Boys Grammar School. My sister went to the girls' school. It was an idyllic life. We spent all our time on the beach, and I spent all my time in the water. So it was...
Very nice
know.
childhood.
Yeah, and it was there, I suppose, that my interest in coasts developed. And I was overwhelmed by the curiosity of, when I was that age, how did it get like this? What were the processes and what was going on, you know?
You mean sort of the ripples in the
Yeah,
sand?
as I went on, well, yes, but the cliffs and the beach and
Okay.
you know, everything else. But it was guided by special teachers, particularly the geography master, a man called Fred Dutton.
Okay.
And then the history side came because we had magical history teachers. But the geography master did one thing for me that stayed with me all my life. He said, tell me, Dennis, what do you make of the shore? And it took me ages until I realised that he was telling me it was the most magical place on earth. It was the only place to be if you're a natural historian of any sort. And the reason is because it's the only place on the planet where the atmosphere and the ocean and the land meet. And it meets in a line about the size of my finger,
Yeah.
you know, and that's where it's all happening. And if you think about it, all of the energy of the sun, which is beating down all the time, which is causing pressure systems and wind systems, and the wind transfers all that energy to the ocean, and the waves of the ocean come crashing in. They're crashing in on this little strip,
Yeah.
which might be a cliff, might be a beach, you know, might be a rocky platform, whatever. But it's just the ultimate place where energy is being dispelled.
So a very, very active interface.
Yeah, yeah.
So what happens when you finish school?
Because I had wanted to do PE, physical education, and be a teacher, and I'd registered at Leeds Carnegie
Yeah.
to do that with a general degree at Leeds University in geography to do the academic side of being a teacher. And to my surprise, I was doing botany, zoology, geography, and when the results came out, which were given in percentage terms,
Yeah.
so effectively I'd got 3 A stars, and so obviously the headmaster calls me in and says, "Well done, boy. You know, which college are you going to?" And I told him that I wasn't going to college, and with his agreement I was going to do PE because that's what I was good at. And he said, "Absolutely not. No. You know, it's got to be Oxbridge or London or whatever." And I said, "Look, I can't go because I don't have a language." So he said, "Well, that's all right. You stay on for another year, boy, and get it." So I said, "There's no way that I'm staying on at school. I'm leaving." And he said, "Well, go to university and take it while you're there." And I said, "Look, I hate the subject. I'm not good at it, and I won't get it." And he then said, "Well, your only choice is you'll have to do your national service and get it in while you're in national service." And I chose the RAF. I suppose mainly because when I was growing up and very young, I used to watch the Spitfires and things, you know. It seemed glamorous.
Yeah.
It wasn't very glamorous, actually, when I got in there. And I wanted to be a photographic interpreter in the intelligence side of it.
Oh, yeah. Exciting
That
stuff.
was quite interesting because they posted me as a nurse to Lytham St Anne's.
Oh, that's
And-
the military.
Yeah. And I thought, oh goodness, I really don't want to be a nurse and I don't want to live in Lancashire. So I went home on my first leave, and while I was there, there were great floods at Lytham,
Oh, crikey.
and they drafted the army in to clear them up. And so our intake couldn't go to Lytham to be nurses. And I was reposted to Newnham Park in Oxfordshire to be an air photo interpreter.
Oh, wow.
And
It's an ill win then.
Yeah, so from there I learnt all about photography and scales and runs and plotting them on cover traces and you know, the whole thing about interpretation. It was an incredible training and utterly interesting. And as I went on through doing things there, I was able to look at all parts of the world. You know, the last thing I did was looking at the air photos before the Suez invasion.
Oh, right.
You know, so I was able to just look at deserts and
Fantastic deserts from the air.
yeah,
Nothing like
yeah,
it.
No, just incredible deserts. And I just loved it. And I learnt skills there that have been with me all my life. And it went
That's
on
nice.
with the development of satellites, and then later in my life, with the new bathymetry for the ocean floor.
Oh, right. Okay.
And
So
that's
another
how
surface you're now looking
I
at.
began to work with oil companies as well, and BP in particular were very good to me. And I did my last job on interpreting the bathymetric images, the new multi-beam bathymetry, when I was 80.
Wow. That's incredible.
So I'm 84 now, so I worked up till 4 years ago. And then 2 years ago, I did the air photography for the new Thames crossing
Oh, wow.
that's going
Wow.
to take place. So it's been with me all my
Your
life.
life.
It's been
So
the most
this
valuable
interesting
skill.
in how the seashore looked and the
Yeah,
cliffs
yeah,
and the ripples in the sand
Yeah,
and everything
everything.
is now
Yeah.
becoming
Yeah,
So it's something you can
map
see.
the geology from it, and you can tell what the processes are doing, and you
Yeah.
can look at the offshore of Lyme Bay and see where the Shambles sandbank is and where the Portland Race goes, and you can model that, and you can now plant on top of the seabed models, the ocean model.
Yeah.
You know, what we can do now with digital things. If I could have done that when I was young,
Yeah.
oh goodness. You know, but it's been a learning process
Yeah.
for me all my life. It started with my geography teacher who taught me about the interface, about the RAF that gave me the skills. And
So what happens after the RAF?
I chose King's, I went to King's. I did all my training there I went there in 56, graduated in 59. And then as I was going home at the end of my degree, wondering what I was going to do, Wooldridge called me in and he said, "Look, boy, do you want to do research?" And I said, "Well, yes, sir. How can I do that?" And he said, "Well, I'll get you a tutorial studentship." He said, "It means you'll have to do 6 hours teaching a week, but you'll get all your money to stay and do a PhD with me." And so
What a nice deal.
I was only just out of, school, as it were. I started doing this, and I was sitting there after about 6 months. I was sitting in the research room. One of the very young lecturers came into me and he said, "Have you got anything to show the old man?" And I said, "Well, I've just completed my first map, of Dartmoor. I was doing a PhD on the landscape of Dartmoor,
Oh, right. Okay.
and I've just prepared this thing with all the tours and other things." And he said, "Well, when I come out, you go in and ask him to see it, and he's going to be in a bad mood." So I said, "Oh, right." So he came out looking very grey. And he'd gone in and resigned and to go to Australia. And I walked in and I said, "Sorry, I wonder if you'd look at this for me." And he looked at it and he said, "Do you want a job?" And I said, "Well, yes, what?" Thinking he had something he wanted to do. And he said, "Right," he said, "you'll be assistant lecturer in September." Well, I'd been a research student for 6 months.
So you're just beginning of your PhD.
I just beginning my PhD. I went from an undergraduate straight onto the staff, effectively.
Those were the days.
And I've been there ever
My
since.
God, you'd
Yeah.
be struggle to do that now,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
you've been there ever since.
Yeah, I did my PhD while I was learning how to teach. And I just finished the PhD in 1964 when we were a joint school of geography with London School of Economics.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was. So I was getting sort of human, economic, anthropological stuff as well as, and I did that course myself. So I then became a teacher in that. And one of the professors there, Buchanan, he was called, R.O. Buchanan, wonderful, wonderful New Zealand lecturer. And he said, Dennis, I've watched you. He said, you need experience. And I've arranged for you, if you're willing, to go to Christchurch, University of Canterbury in New Zealand. But I grew up, I think, on the way a lot, and certainly grew up in New Zealand.
You travel out to New Zealand, so what exactly were you going to do in New Zealand?
Well, I had to teach physical geography and geomorphology. I did second year students and also the master's students in University of Canterbury.
Oh, right.
What I did was travel New Zealand.
Which I guess is...
We bought a little old standard car, because cars in New Zealand, I think they were only allowed so many new cars a year, so they kept cars going. They've got an expression there of she'll be right.
Yes.
So if anything goes wrong, she'll be right. And my car was all right. Somebody done it up. It was very old. But we travelled what I thought was every road in New Zealand. And in those days, roads in New Zealand were dirt. The only tarmac was in Auckland and Wellington, and one road from Christchurch to Dunedin. My objective was to see as many landscapes and as violent things as I could, because this country is actually very benign.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are landslides and things, but it's the coast that is doing everything. In New Zealand, there's everything happening.
Yeah,
There's
very active.
Volcanoes,
Yeah.
glaciers, rivers that go 1.5 miles wide, braided streams carrying great shingle banks down, that roaring floods, landslides like you wouldn't believe. But I learned everything there.
Yeah.
I learned everything about my subject you could want to learn.
Fantastic. When you get such a geologically active place, I guess you can actually see all this stuff happening. Okay, so how long you were in New Zealand for?
A year the first time. So and then we came back on the Ruahine again and just reversed our trip. And I went back into King's and started teaching. And then I stayed there all my life.
Yeah. So the topic you were actually interested in is geomorphology, is it? Yeah. So what exactly is geomorphology? You kind of work out what it might mean.
Geo is the earth,
yeah.
And morph is shape, and ology is the study of.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean the study of the shape of the earth. What it means is a study of the shapes on the earth.
Yeah.
In other words, all the landforms that you see, anything from a mountain to a cliff to a glacier to a sand dune. And in particular, the processes that are operating on it and creating it and maintaining it and changing it. So my part of that was I was fascinated by the soil erosion in New Zealand. I came back home and thought, I want to work on landslides. And one of the lecturers, he was at UC then, he was running a University of London field trip for 40 students down here, and he said, oh Dennis, there are wonderful landslides on the coast in Dorset. And I knew that because my wife's family had cottages at Ype.
Oh yeah.
And I sort of used to come down here with her on holidays, and I knew the coast a bit, but I didn't know the landslides like Stonebarrow and Black Fen and the others. And he said, come down and I'll show you around and you can learn how to teach in the field with students like this.
On
and
field
they
courses?
were conservation students.
Okay.
Yeah, so he was called Eric Bird, and he started the conservation course at UC. He suddenly got the flu, and I ended up arriving at the coach to take 40 students from all the colleges of London, of which I only knew about 6 of my own, down to Dorset, where I'd never been, to landscapes I'd never seen, to teach landslides, which I didn't know anything about. And
Okay,
that's
this is sounding really promising.
yeah, and that's where it began. And then I applied for the only time in my life for a research grant from the Natural Environment Research Council at NERC, NERC, and I got a couple of £1,000 to study landslides, Stone Barrow in particular, and I put instruments in the ground which I'd learnt about in New Zealand, you know, pitsometers to measure pore water pressure and all sorts of survey stakes and remote control rain gauges, and I put them down in the middle of Stone Barrow Hill, some of which are still there, incidentally.
All right.
And I studied that for 67, 8, 9, 70, and then published, and then went on to study elsewhere. And by that time I was beginning to do applied geology and geomorphology. But you see, what I was interested in was what the processes were doing, what the landslides were doing, how the sediment was being delivered to the beaches, how it made the beaches, and how the sediment moved on the beaches. And from there, you know, what was happening under the sea, and what was the energy of the waves, what was the atmosphere doing, what was the interaction between rainfall and landslides, or hot and cold temperatures on landslides, but particularly studying the effect of water in the hill. Which is the key to the whole thing, of course. I decided that I needed some better geology. So I went with a friend who subsequently was part of my life, a man called Dr. John Dornkamp from Nottingham University. And we went down to Bristol to a conference where there'd been experimental mapping done by a big soil mechanics firm, and they were displaying all the results, and it was for the Taff Vale Trunk Road in Wales.
Oh, right.
And they'd mapped the geology all the way. It was quite new at that time, engineering geology mapping. And we were standing in front of it, and I looked at it and I said to John, God, John, this is so simple. You know, why don't they learn how to do some geomorph mapping? It would make so much more sense, because they've missed most of the stuff that's there.
So what's the difference then between these geological maps and the geomorphology maps?
Well, they don't record the processes that are going on.
Oh, I see. Yes,
you know.
yes.
They just, it's what the geology is in that section, like what's that wall made of?
Yeah.
You know, and is there a fault in it? And they put faults on and structures on and dips, you know, of the rock and all that. But all the interesting dynamic stuff was missing.
Okay. So, you know, like whether it's stable or whether it's about to move.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very highly developed science now.
Yeah.
And, you know, the whole journal's written about engineering geology. But what was I doing? Oh yes, I turned to John and I said, look, John, you know, this is so simple. It's a load of rubbish, really. You know, we could do that in a couple of days, standing on our heads. You know, just one chunk of it. And this happened to be the Tarrant landslide at Aberfan. The road was going right through past Aberfan. So a landslide was serious there, you know, if they were going to put a road through the toe of it. And it wasn't on the map. And I knew the landslide was there. And I'd said to John, look, it's rubbish, John, you know, you and I can do this. And I felt a hand tap me on the shoulder, and I turned round, and there were two men standing there. One was called Mr. Ainscough, who was senior partner at Rendell, Palmer and Tritton. Well, I don't know whether he was senior, but a partner anyway. And next to him was a man called Peter Fuchs, who was a lecturer who was starting the science of engineering geology mapping at Imperial. And Ainscough said to me, what did I hear you say? And I said, well, sorry, sir, is this your work? He said, no, I funded it, so I want to know what you think about it. So I said, well, it's a load of rubbish. And he said, okay. He said, which bit do you want to map? So I said, well, I can't do that. He said, look, this weekend, put your money where your mouth is. He said, I'll pay for your travel. I'll pay for a place for you to sleep. He said, come back with a map. So I went down with a research student and an undergraduate to map it. They were holding poles and tapes.
Yeah.
And came back with a map. And on Monday, I got off at Cannon Street rather than Waterloo, and went round to the Rendell, Palmer and Tritton offices and handed it in and said, well, I know you're busy, but when you have time, you know, have a look at the map. And I went back to King's. And as I walked in my door, the phone rang, and there was Ainscough at the other end, and he said, what do you mean by this? So I said, what? And he said, this map, he said, you've got landslides all the way along, and a great, huge landslide right next to Aravan. What's that about? And I said, well, that's what's there. And he said, no, we can't have that. He said, cancel your lectures and come over here and we'll get in the car and we'll go down there and you can show us. And I said, well, I can't do that. And I went into my prof and said, you know, this is what's happened. He said, get down there, you know. This is your opportunity to really make your mark in what you can do. We went down, we walked up the back of a hill, and I looked over the thing, and I said, there you are, the Tarrant landslide. And he looked at it and said, what are you talking about? And Peter Fuchs said, oh, no, Ken, I think we better withdraw from this. There is the biggest landslide I've seen, and it's all on this map. And you challenged him and he's answered. So we went on the way back in the vehicle. He said, right, he said, £25 a day retainer for you and 2 others. Go and map the whole road from Cardiff to Merthyr Tydfil and show us what you can do. And that's where it all started.
A lifetime of travelling the world, and so you finish. Yeah. Presumably at some time at the university, full-time work. Yeah. So what happens then?
Well, in the 1990s, yeah. Well, I took early retirement because I actually didn't like what was happening in universities at that time. It was all about mergers and money, and it was Margaret Thatcher wanted value for money. Everything had to be assessed. Everything had to be accounted for. Everything had to be given a rate or a rank.
Yeah. I remember those days. I was at School of Tropical Medicine in London, just up the road from you.
Right. Yeah. Well, I didn't enjoy it, so I took early retirement.
Okay.
And we came to live here.
This house you came to live in?
30 years ago.
Okay.
We came here. And during that time, it was really only possible to take retirement because I'd been doing this consultancy work all around the world. You know, the Kotmale Dam in Sri Lanka and the Wadi Damad irrigation scheme in Saudi Arabia and wherever it was. You know, Algeria and Egypt, the Cairo sewage scheme, and all sorts of consultancy work. And it just sort of went on as I retired. And instead of going to King's, I was going off to work with engineering companies. I was a retained consultant with Rendell and then with Halcro. And I'd early done some work with oil companies, particularly BP. And a lot of other companies asked me to work with them. And so I just travelled the world from...
Sort of as a freelance consultant.
Yeah,
excellent.
Yeah. And of course the money got better and better as time went by, and I became more and more experienced. And then I was given a medal by the Geological Society of London, the William Smith Medal. I mean, William Smith made the first ever geology map, and it's a prestigious medal. And I was given that for engineering geomorphology.
That's terrific. So how did you get involved in the Jurassic Coast then?
When we came to live here, it coincided soon after that the government was really worried about the conflicts that were taking place around the coast of Britain. So we've got something like 130 stakeholders on the coast, everything from surfers against sewage to West Dorset district planners, you know, to the public or anyone who has any interest in the coast at all, fishermen, etc. And there was a lot of discussion in the early 90s about creating a Ministry of the Sea.
Oh, right.
And the government didn't want to do it, as you can imagine. They didn't want a quango either, and they didn't want another minister. And they came up with that, or someone, I think it was someone in Southampton, I can't remember his name, began with S, who suggested coastal fora, which would be meetings for consensus.
Oh, right, okay.
And they asked to several places to start off the idea, and I think the Solent was the first. Then they had the idea of the Lyme Bay Forum, and they had a meeting at Dawlish.
Right.
This was 1994. And they asked me, since I knew the coast all the way around, I mean, from the Devon days when I was young, right the way through to Portland, I knew all that. They said, would you give a keynote lecture to explain the coast to the people there, sort of a good general lecture, which I did.
A geomorphologist's view of the world, you know?
Yes, a geomorphologist's view of the world, but also the geology of the cliffs and everything else. And I did the waves. I did the interface thing, the most dynamic place in the world. That was the theme. And right at the end of it, having shown all these wonderful photographs and processes, I just threw out, anywhere else in the world, this would be a World Heritage Site. And finished the lecture. And afterwards, the two planning officers, Richard Townley from Dorset and Ed Cholton from Devon, who had been standing at the back just listening and chatting to each other, came up to me and said, "Did you mean that?" And I said, "Well, of course I meant it." He said, "Right," he said, "we'll set up a committee of people from Plymouth University, the Geological Survey in Exeter, and University of Bournemouth and yourself and a few others, and then the planners from East Devon and West Dorset. And you can investigate whether it's possible." So for about 4 years, I think, we investigated it and came to the conclusion, yes, we can do this.
Really? That's quite a long time to sit and...
Well, there's a lot of research into becoming a World Heritage Site, because you have to, first of all, have a reason. What has it got that makes it precious and so important to all the people of the planet that it must be looked after for all time?
So for everybody, this is
for everybody on the planet. I mean, that's what UNESCO's about. And you've got to therefore have a story. And so they asked me if I would do the research. And I went through every blimmin' thing and discovered that it's one of the only places in the world where you can walk along a shoreline throughout the entire Mesozoic period, almost without a break, through every rock that was deposited in one ocean basin over 185 million years. And by walking 95 miles along. And the reason is because the rocks dip like that.
Yeah.
Right? So you've got the older ones underneath, the younger ones on top, and they dip like that. So if you walk horizontally, you're walking from one rock into another rock into another rock, and they're getting younger as you do it towards the east. Yeah?
Yeah.
And so we came up with the strapline, A Walk Through Time. But at the same time, as these rocks are being deposited, there's animals swimming in the sea or walking on the land at that end and sea from about there on. And these animals are dying and becoming fossilized. So it's not only a walk through time, it's a walk through the evolution of species for getting on for 200 million years.
Yeah, evolution of life on Earth, yeah.
The evolution of life on Earth for the whole of the Mesozoic.
Yeah.
And because it's got these fossils, and because it's got such spectacular landslides and processes, there were literally hundreds of people working on it. I mean, famous scientists from the past. William Buckland,
Oh, crikey, yeah. Victorian, great in geology,
and
paleontology.
He came from Axminster originally, and the vicar of Axminster was called Conybeare, and he was another member of the newly formed Geological Society of London. And he used to come down and study with Conybeare. And then, of course, there's Mary Anning doing all these things and corresponding with Buckland. And she was then in contact with famous scientists like Roderick Murchison and Cuvier in Paris and all the others, all this correspondence, and all of that. So it becomes here the birthplace of the geological sciences in Britain, as well as Yorkshire and a few other places, you know, but this is one of the big birthplaces. But it becomes the study of the history of the subject through these great minds and great people. This becomes 3 stories for World Heritage class. The creation of a science, you know, the geology and the evolution of life, and then on top of that, the spectacular landforms and the process, the outstanding processes that created them. So we wrote a bid. It became on the tentative list for the British government in 1998. 1999 we were accepted as the only bid that was ready to go because we'd printed the volume. I'd written all this research. The planners had got behind us and had written a management plan, which you don't get World Heritage without a management plan.
Yeah, I can assure,
And they put it in 2000 and we were inscribed in 2001. So they created here a Dorset Coast Forum and I became the chairman of that. So they asked me if I would chair the Dorset, and so I did 10 years chairing the Dorset Coast Forum, and the World Heritage story emerges from the forum because our vision was very wide, and one of the visions was celebrate the coast and educate the people, and that's you know, a vision that's really important. We believed that the whole secret of everything that happens on the coast, whether it's in World Heritage terms or the forum terms, is consensus of people and agreement between 130 stakeholders and whatever their interests
and very conflicting interests.
Yes, very and often great conflict. You know, like sewage and surfers. But planners who want to, or engineers who want to develop seawalls, and people who want wildlife or whatever it might be, big conflict. And the object of the forum was to get all these people to be aware that there are other people who they might hurt, or they might be able to help. And so it was a case of getting them to know each other and to stand up, you know, about 6 different interests each time we met, to teach each other and to learn to have a meal together, go out for a pint together. And so that when something comes up, they'd ring up, like someone was wanting to develop more caravans on a site, and it was going to conflict other people who had major interests in the view that would be messed up or whatever it was. They'd go and ring them up and talk to them first and say, look, how can, this is what I want to do, how can we do this minimum sort of impact?
So a good bit of conflict resolution then. Wow.
Well, it was, and it had one underlying truth, and that was me insisting that any decisions that were done about the coast, anything that was done with the best knowledge, and that meant education. And I said, look, if we can teach, and I'll lecture up and down the coast, but let's get this, let's have an education strategy all the way up from school onwards, and let us teach, because out of teaching comes understanding of the coast and animals or whatever it might be. Out of understanding comes hopefully respect, and out of respect comes personal ownership. You know, because I love my apple tree, I sort of, you know, or the coast. I have a sense of owning this coast. I don't, of course, actually in money terms, but I've got an interest. It's mine. And out of that, sort of out of a real respect, understanding respect, and then this business of ownership, because it's yours, you want to look after it. You're going to
Yes.
care. And you don't need planning. You just need consensus. And you need people to talk to each other. And you need people not to be blimmin' mean. You know, to just do think of
Share a bit
everybody
more.
else. And that what made the Dorset Coast Forum so successful. And out of that emerged the World Heritage.
So what sort of support did you get from
we got-
what we might call officialdom?
We got total support from officialdom, and there were very, very important people in Dorset and Devon. The main Devon man, apart from the planning officer, was called David Andrew. Wonderful, wonderful environment officer. In Dorset, you had Richard Townley, the planning officer, the chief exec, but you had Andy Price. It was a very powerful, very important, very caring, very understanding planning officer. And he had two people working for him. One was called Malcolm Turnbull from Swanage, who had started a lot of this off by writing 2 volumes for Dorset County about the future of the Dorset coast. There are 2 smashing volumes. Everyone should read about his collection about that. And there was a young man brought in called Tim Badman, who was, he just had such an incisive, organising mind that he knocked the bid into shape. He rewrote it. He got all the figures, the figure permissions. He compiled the management plan and everything. Really, really important stuff.
What do you think then are the main benefits of World Heritage status?
To whom?
Well, that's a very good question for the people of the world, if you like, but certainly the people in Britain.
Oh, well, as I explained, this is a very special place. And it's, if you believe that geology, geomorphology, landforms, views, processes, people are important, then, and if you've promised to look after it, then I think the benefit is that people come to understand and appreciate that. Now, what has it meant down here? It's meant that bed occupancy in all the outlets has gone up by something like 23%. And there's a disadvantage with that in that what it means is more people. But anyway, the first thing is that. The second thing is that it's increased employment in service industries and the tourist industry and those other things. The last figure I had was something like 15%.
Okay.
But they ran an economic survey, and they reckon it brings in something over £100 million a year to the economy of Dorset. I don't know Devon so well.
Okay, so there are economic benefits, but there are also other benefits.
Well,
sort
of
of
course.
the benefits of actually making sure that it stays here.
Yeah, of course.
More people are interested.
Yeah.
People get access to
Yes.
places
So-
to do
So
research.
there's first there's the hearts and lungs of the nation. Let's keep one place decent, clean.
Yeah.
Even though Chiddock's got the most polluted street in Britain, the coast is down there, and it's in pretty good nick, and it's a wonderful place to visit. And why people come is because it does relax and it does educate. We have an education program to try to constantly educate the public. I mean, I've given literally hundreds of lectures as an example. We have an arts program as well, and there's a resident Dorset poet, for example,
Excellent.
for Trust poet. I mean, don't mean Dorset. I mean the World Heritage Trust. There's an artist is sponsored every year to paint on the coast, but there's a lot of work done in schools. We had the idea of having a string of pearls along the coast. So at Durlston, there's Durlston Castle, which is mainly wildlife, but has some Jurassic Coast interest too, inside the centre. You come along and there's a wonderful. I cannot speak highly enough of the Etches collection, the marine
at
life
Kimmeridge.
collection
Yeah.
at Kimmeridge.
Yeah.
And you then, come along to Bridport, and at these points you're now beginning to get museums involved, and they're all interested. So the Lyme Regis Museum, the Bridport
Yeah.
Museum, the Axminster Museum, the Budley Museum, and so on. And you go along the coast, the Charmouth Heritage Centre, and they run fossil walks up and down the coast. There is a fossil warden who, if he sees people behaving irresponsibly on the cliff, goes up and has a chat with them. But hundreds of people, no, thousands.
Oh, thousands now.
Thousands.
Yeah.
I mean, they're up to 100,000 visitors now.
Yeah, it's amazingly popular. If you go along there of a morning, well, depending on the tides, the tap, tap, tap of the Jurassic Coast is really, really common.
And then the idea emerged of a fossil festival. And it was funded by all sorts of people, but the Natural History Museum came in so strongly, and without them it would never have been the thing it was, because, I don't know, what did you bring down? 30 people at a time,
yeah.
and who were top-level scientists who were reaching out for the first time to mums and dads as well as kids. Yeah. But I tell you, the best thing that happened to me at that festival, Plymouth University always got behind it.
Mm-hmm. They did, yeah.
And they had a runway, a walkway, down which they ran a piece of white lining paper. So the floor was lining paper. And they had a tray at this end and a whole lot of welly boots. And on the bottom of the welly boots were dinosaur footprints, or feet, so that they'd make footprints. And they had kids who, I think the parents, when it first started, paid 10p or something. And the kids stood in the paint and then ran up the paper, quite a distance, run. And when they got to the other end, they were taken, they had their boots taken off, they were given a ruler, and they were asked to measure the length of their stride and the size of their footprint. And then they had to go up to the computer at the end and put it in a computer and identify what they were. And I watched a girl do this. She was about 13, I suppose. And she went up, and she was a velociraptor. And by that time, the paint had dried, and she rolled up her floor piece and took it home to hang on her bedroom wall. 5 years later, that girl entered Plymouth University Geology Department to do geology.
Yeah, fantastic.
Now, you can't beat that in any way at all. And if you ask for what it does for people, it's sometimes a lifetime of interest and education. You spark people off. They've only got to look down one of your microscopes, microfossils, or they go and see David Soll with ammonites this big, some of the finest ammonites on fossil fish in the world, on display in a tent.
Yeah, it's a real thing. That's the other thing. People get in front of the real thing. They talk to real experts.
Absolutely.
And they see real objects, which are just so captivating.
Yeah, so you can go in benefits from the economy to employment to maintaining businesses to supplying food and all that sort of thing. But the big vision is the educational vision, because it runs through that respect, understanding, care, ownership, care story. But it also informs people when they want to do something that might just affect the rest of us.
Yeah.
And so I think it gives understanding and love, and it gives hearts and minds and lungs. And I'm just so pleased by it, really.
So, Dennis, what do you think the two of the World Heritage Site is?
The future of the World Heritage Site is more of the same, but there's two, to me, truly important things. The whole thing started off with the Dorset Coast Forum wanting to have a real understanding through education, so that every decision that was made was based on the best available scientific or arts or whatever knowledge. It's got to be based on the best knowledge, or else you'll make the wrong decisions. So that has to continue, that whole programme. And there are conferences held every now and again to look at the new science. The proceedings of the Geologists Association has just got a new volume out on the Jurassic Coast, that
great.
sort of thing. So we've got to progress the science. We've got to progress it in the universities. We've got to make sure that Bournemouth and its conservation department and Plymouth with its geology and geography, and Exeter in particular, have got to get behind this with research grants and follow up the problems that there are on the coast, the unknowns that are stopping us from doing it properly. So perhaps the most important future I know is the education programme developing together with art and all those other things. And it's at university level and agency level as well as public level. I mean, we do a good job with the public, actually, through the centres, but we're not so much of an academic job that could be done. And it's vital that places like the Natural History Museum keep coming and have new ways of reaching the public, of outreach, not just the Lyme Regis Fossil Festival. Let's do something else. Let's have a bit more exciting than that. So that's one. I think the second is that we really must have a centre of some sort that is a World Heritage Centre. I mean, you go to Westland National Park in New Zealand, and there's this World Heritage Centre, you know. You can get everything you want there, all the information. What do we need here? We need at Charmouth or Lyme Regis something that puts together 6 or 7 of the finest fossil collections in Britain. There are people there with stuff quite the equal of the Etches collection, but there's a lot of them, and they don't want to lose their stuff, and they don't want to sell it. Mm-hmm. They want it to be theirs and their families, but they want it to be seen. They want people to learn from it. They want questions to be asked, and they want the tradition of collecting to be allowed to freely go on. You know, when it's ex situ, out of the cliff, you collect it, otherwise the sea destroys it. Yeah. And so, you know, erosion's a good thing because it's giving us the fossils, but for goodness sake, let us collect them.
Yeah, and also the enormous skill there is in preparing it. People tend to forget the skill.
Them, let alone seeing you're walking past a whole cliff of rock and somebody sees a bit of bone that big sticking out, and behind it is a 14-metre ichthyosaur. Yeah. You know, so that sort of stuff. Yeah. But then the cleaning that starts way back with people like Mary Anning, you know, who cleaned our specimens and sold them. So we need those things, and one way to do that is a centre where the collections can be there, but you can also have a preparation room with those fossilers taking it in turns to be in the preparation room, cleaning fossils and describing fossils and preparing them and mending them and presenting them in front of the public and talking to the public and the children as they do it. So there's all that, and then there's the walks and a centre from which education takes place, lectures take place, schools come in from all over the world, and I mean, you know, there is a great international link as well, and so something like that, and maybe even residential, you know, like field centres used to be, you know, and we've been quite close to doing it, but it's beyond the resources of the trust, you know, that you need people to do it, and it does need someone to get together, a team that works with the trust and works with the museums.
Do you think then that when you set out, and you and the others set out so many years ago, writing all this stuff to make a case for it, do you think it's realised what you all thought at the time?
Oh yes, far beyond. Okay. Yes. I've got no hesitation in saying that. I think it's something that the area should be proud of, and the JOLSOC again came up with an award, the R.H. Worth Award, which was given to Tim and Malcolm and David Andrew and myself.
So the future then of the UNESCO World Heritage Site looks very positive.
I hope so, yes. Well, it will always have funding problems. and it will always have, team problems and all sorts of other things, and not enough people to do things. But it's got a very strong committee. It's got good trustees. It's got fantastic officers.
And good local support.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, and that's coming more and more from. There are three: the business world. There are ambassadors, and there are young ambassadors, rangers, who we who go along the coast and talk to people, and there are key ambassadors local people who have just got an interest and want to help, and there are strong funders, but not enough of them.